Good evening. My name is Nikki Johnson, and I actually live in the state of North Carolina. Within this state, the mental health counseling profession is governed by the North Carolina Board of Licensed Clinical Mental Health Counselors. So in addition to the ACA standards, the North Carolina Board has determined that there are some additions that will be required of counselors in this profession. One of the things that has to happen is there's a professional disclosure statement that every counselor has to complete before any services can be rendered. And that professional disclosure statement has some components of the ACA guidelines, but in addition to those, there are other requirements. So included in that professional disclosure statement are things like the obvious name and degree information, as well as the licenses and certifications that the counselor holds. That has to be publicly disclosed. They also have to talk about the type of services that are rendered, the years of experience that they have, and they must specify the description of the population or clientele that they'll serve. And that is very different than the ACA component, where you have to mention if it's adult populations you're serving, if it's geriatrics or children. There's a distinction in the state of North Carolina that's required. The counselors also have to mention their theoretical orientation and the techniques they intend to use. So for example, I went out and looked at 2 different counselors' profiles in North Carolina. One listed cognitive and behavioral therapy as a technique, and the other actually uses EMDR as a technique, and that is a state requirement. They have to disclose the length of the sessions that will transpire and a fee schedule. So the client needs to be fully aware of what's expected in terms of payments that are accepted and what kind of billing and insurance reimbursement they can expect to receive as well. That is also, in addition to the ACA standard, a comparison point that is quite different. Included that is congruent with the ACA ethics standard, ethics code, is an explanation of confidentiality. So within that professional disclosure statement, counselors must tell their clients what the responsibilities are from a reporting perspective and any exceptions that have to be made. Some of those exceptions will include court-ordered mandates for counseling, harm to self or others. And included in that exception disclosure, the counselor must also talk about what are the ramifications if the client chooses not to proceed with care. Because remember, in the end, informed consent is really all about ensuring that the counseling relationship between the counselor and the client is defined and established. And that also means that a client can enter into that counseling relationship and they can also leave it whenever they choose. Now, in the state of North Carolina, a copy has to be provided to the client and a copy has to be retained by the counselor with the signature on it. Lastly, I'll mention there's a study in 2024 around informed consent and the assessment of competence. And I found this interesting because if you're making a determination on whether a client is actually competent to provide informed consent, today clinical assessments from mental health counselors and actually other people in the medical profession find it difficult. They don't always get that right. And so there's been some empirical research done to suggest that there needs to be some standardized tools. So within this study, there was a determination that just based on the clinical assessment, competence assessment alone, the clinical judgment that most people have is too subjective. Therefore, many times in this particular study, they could call out instances where there was just some incongruence in making that determination. So the standardized tools right now, it seems to me, are being studied for reliability. So more to come on that. Thank you so much for your time today, and I look forward to hearing everyone else's presentation.